I'm guessing you clicked on this video because you're worried about your cholesterol. I talk to my patients about this every day, and with the right dietary changes, some people can drop their LDL cholesterol by up to 30%. So today, we're going to focus on the top 9 strategies that have been scientifically proven to lower your LDL cholesterol naturally. I'm sure you've heard a lot of strong opinions on social media about dietary fats, but let's focus on how they impact your LDL cholesterol. Starting with a quick review so we're all on the same page. Trans fats used to be found in hydrogenated oils, but they're so dangerous that they've been banned in most countries. Saturated fats are found in coconut oil, butter, and ice cream. Monounsaturated fats, or MUFAs, are found in olive oil, avocados, and almonds. And finally, polyunsaturated fats, or PUFAs, which include omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Think salmon, walnuts, flax, and sunflower seeds. It's a well-established fact that eating less saturated fats will lower your LDL cholesterol. For an average person, if you cut out 100 calories worth of pure saturated fat, which is the amount of saturated fat you'll find in one honey cruller donut, you can drop your LDL by 6.5 to 10.5 points, depending on what you replace it with. PUFAs give you the best bang for your buck, but MUFAs and carbs can also lower your LDL. What about protein? Well, it hasn't been looked at directly, but the OmniHeart trial suggests that it should be helpful too. But you'll notice that none of these studies swapped saturated fats for junk food. I think we often look for loopholes in diets to try to find a way to justify eating those not so healthy foods that we love. Although gummy bears and sugary drinks don't have any saturated fats, no matter how you spin it, they're not going to protect you from heart disease. Weight gain, metabolic syndrome, and diabetes are all associated with higher LDL and cardiovascular risk. So the quality of the food that you swap does matter. You know, researching for this video made me reflect on my diet, and I realized that I'm not incorporating nearly enough PUFAs as I should be. So my husband and I have started grabbing a handful of walnuts as an afternoon snack, and I've also started sprinkling sunflower seeds onto our salads. And it really wasn't that hard to add it in. We just needed to make a plan that worked for us and add it to the grocery list. And when it comes to saturated fats, I think all of us jump to thinking about fatty meats, butter, and cheese. But I'd encourage you to look closely at sugary treats and snacks as well. Did you know that a large Tim Hortons iced cap can have up to 21 grams of saturated fat? That's equivalent to slurping down the fat from 16 slices of bacon. And coconut oil, which has really been marketed as a health food, has far more saturated fat than butter, pound for pound. And it's often incorporated into plant-based desserts or fancy popcorns. Okay, so to summarize, fat is not the enemy, but if you want to lower your LDL cholesterol, you should eat less saturated fat, and be careful not to replace it with refined sugars, starch, or ultra-processed foods. Did you know the way you brew your coffee can have a huge impact on your LDL? Coffee naturally contains a substance called cafestol, which interferes with your liver's ability to remove LDL from your bloodstream. And any coffee that doesn't pass through a paper filter will have cafestol in it. The worst preparation for this is boiling coffee, like Turkish coffee, followed by more common methods like espresso and French press. A review of 6 randomized trials showed that just by adding a paper filter, you could lower your LDL on average by 15 points. Pretty impressive for such a small change to your morning routine. All right, now what about the effect of just straight up eating cholesterol, like you find in eggs? On social media, there's 2 camps. One group says it's poison and you shouldn't eat any dietary cholesterol. And the other says it's fine, you can eat as much cholesterol as you want. The truth is, there's far too much genetic variability to make an overarching statement like that. While the average person absorbs about 50% of the free cholesterol that makes it into their small bowel, some people absorb as much as 90%, while others absorb almost 0. As you can imagine, this makes a huge difference. And unfortunately, there's no routine test to tell you how much cholesterol you naturally absorb. Randomized trials suggest that for the average person, eating 1 egg could increase your LDL by around 5 points. So it's a pretty small impact. And if you're eating a boiled egg instead of a candy bar or an iced cap, then it's probably a net benefit. In fact, the American Heart Association is clear that 1 egg yolk per day is fine for most healthy people with a normal LDL. So even if you have normal cholesterol, it's not a free-for-all. But at the end of the day, if your goal is to decrease your LDL, it's reasonable to try cutting out eggs and other sources of dietary cholesterol. And the magnitude of change that you're gonna see will depend a lot on your genetics. And once again, it's crucial to ensure that you're not replacing these foods with ultra-processed junk foods or foods that are higher in saturated fat. Even if you forget everything else I say in this video, remember this: just because a food is cholesterol-free doesn't mean it's necessarily a good choice. Always check the saturated fat content, which generally has a much bigger effect on your LDL. All right, now this one's really easy to add to your diet, and that's fiber. And when it comes to cholesterol, we mainly care about soluble fiber that dissolves in water and forms a gel. And you can actually see this happening when you add water to chia seeds. That thick gel that forms is soluble fiber in action. To understand how it works, you need to understand how cholesterol naturally leaves your body. Basically, your liver pulls LDL cholesterol out of your bloodstream and then dumps it into your small bowel in the form of bile. Normally, about 50% of that cholesterol gets reabsorbed through your gut. But as we talked about before, there's a huge amount of variability from person to person. Soluble fiber works by trapping that cholesterol from bile in its thick gel, which carries it out of your body in your stool. An easy rule of thumb is that for every 1 gram of soluble fiber, you may be able to drop your LDL by around 2 points. Fortunately, a lot of whole foods contain soluble fibers, from oats to barley, legumes, chia seeds, and lots of fruits and vegetables. But if you want to really maximize your intake, you can also add a psyllium fiber supplement like Metamucil. Studies have shown that adding a tablespoon of Metamucil twice per day can lower your LDL cholesterol by an impressive 13 points. Personally, I like the powder better than the gummies or the pills because you have to mix it in with water. But you can experiment and figure out what works best for your system. All right, now let's talk about phytosterols, which are the plant version of cholesterol. There are 2 types, plant sterols and stanols, and they can both help you lower your LDL, and they both work in the same way. Studies have found that a dose of 2 grams per day can help reduce your LDL by about 5 to 10%, but it's almost impossible to get 2 grams of this stuff from your diet alone. So you'll have to resort to fortified foods or supplements instead. And it's worth mentioning that some people hyperabsorb sterols, and taking in such high doses could actually increase their risk of cardiovascular disease. Given these concerns, I'm a bit lukewarm on the sterol supplements, although I wanted to include this here because most medical guidelines still encourage them as a good option. Another strategy is replacing animal proteins with plant proteins. This includes nuts, seeds, and legumes. A review of 108 trials showed that on average, swapping animal protein for plant protein dropped LDL by 0.16 millimoles per liter, so that's about 6 points. Plant proteins have 0 cholesterol and they're typically low in saturated fat. Plus, you have the added bonus of soluble fibers, phytosterols, and healthy fats. I think most people assume that exercise fixes everything, including high cholesterol. But you may be surprised to hear that many lipid experts think that exercise has little to no effect on LDL cholesterol. Although a few months ago, a meta-analysis showed that cardio 4 times a week could drop your LDL by about 5 to 6 points. And adding 2 weight training sessions on top of that could lead to an 11-point drop. If that motivates you to exercise, then fantastic. Just remember that exercise is critical for your overall health, especially your cardiovascular health, regardless of its impact on your LDL. Sustainable weight loss is another good way that you can lower your LDL, especially if you're starting at a high BMI. A recent meta-analysis showed that if you can lose weight and keep it off for at least 12 months, you can lower your LDL by about 1.3 points per kilogram. Now, I want to give probiotics an honorable mention. They haven't been included in the standard medical guidelines, but some early research is promising. It shows that taking probiotics for 2 to 12 weeks could lower your LDL around 8 points. The evidence isn't strong enough to convince me to go out and buy probiotics for this reason. There's not enough guidance on what type of bacteria works best or at what doses, but it's interesting enough to get me to incorporate healthy foods that naturally contain these organisms. Things like miso, kimchi, sauerkraut, yogurt, and kefir. All right, let's be real, it takes a very dedicated person to keep track of everything that we just talked about. And ultimately, we want to make sustainable changes that will reduce your LDL for years and decades. So that's why the major medical guidelines have shifted towards emphasizing healthy patterns of eating, as opposed to micromanaging your intake of saturated fats, PUFA, cholesterol, and fiber. Generally, these will all come into balance if you pick one of these diets. The Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, and plant-based diets have all been proven to lower your LDL and lower your risk of cardiovascular disease. And they have quite a bit in common. They all recommend eating whole fruit, colorful vegetables, and whole grains, and limiting ultra-processed foods, refined sugars, animal fats, and tropical oils like coconut and palm oils. Just remember, no matter what you hear online, there's no single diet that's appropriate for all people. So take these principles and find something sustainable that works for you. I personally love this diagram, so I'd recommend taking a picture or a screen grab or something that you can have with you when you go to the grocery store. Finally, there are 2 remedies that I absolutely do not recommend because they can be really harmful to you and you can end up in the hospital as a result. But first, I want to tell you about a research tool that I think you'll find really useful. It's called Consensus, and they're sponsoring today's video. Basically, it's a smart search engine that only searches through peer-reviewed journals. You type in a question like, does eating eggs increase your cholesterol? And it pulls the answer from over 200 million scientific articles. Now, this is my favorite part. The consensus meter. It's a great visual that tells you the number of studies that answer your question with a yes, no, or maybe. Then if you want to go deeper, you can click on an individual study to get a snapshot of the key information, or you can go on to read the whole article yourself. Personally, I think Consensus is a great way to gather articles and get an overview before doing a deep dive into a topic. Consensus was kind enough to offer the VMD community 1 year of free premium access with the code ViolinMD. So next time you have a science or a health question, check out Consensus. Now back to the 2 remedies to avoid. The first is called red yeast rice. This lowers your LDL in the exact same way that a statin does, because it contains monocolin K, which is literally the exact same active ingredient that's in the medication lovastatin. Don't get me wrong, we know that statins are safe and effective. My concern is that red yeast rice contains a mycotoxin called citrinin, and you can't seem to get around it. All red yeast rice supplements seem to contain citrinin, including the ones that are marketed as citrinin-free. Just last year in Japan, over 500 people taking red yeast rice supplements were hospitalized, and up to 80 people died from kidney failure. So if you're effectively taking a statin, I'd recommend sticking with the prescription version. They're mycotoxin-free, regulated, reliable, and dosed correctly. The second supplement that I do not recommend is green tea extract, specifically a group of chemicals called catechins. These were very popular in the early 2000s, and they were used as a major ingredient in many diet pills. I bring this up because some research has shown that it could reduce your LDL. Unfortunately, they can cause severe liver damage even at recommended doses. I'd stay far away from those supplements, but it shouldn't stop you from enjoying some green tea, although I don't think it'll impact your LDL. So clearly there are many things you can do to help lower your LDL naturally. And even if your LDL doesn't decrease as much as you had hoped with these dietary modifications, keep in mind that these changes have far-reaching effects with your health, not just limited to your LDL. So it's not an all or nothing scenario. I want to give a huge shout out to my amazing husband Mark, who's also a physician. You guys don't get to see the huge amount of work that he puts in behind the scenes.
We had fun with it anyways.
We did.
If you're interested in other ways you can lower your cardiovascular risk, then I suggest you watch our video on how to lower your blood pressure naturally. And otherwise, we'll see you in the next video. So bye for now.
Bye for now.